Hello and welcome to a special episode of Inspired to Act from Thrive Ireland. I'm Diane Holt.
Hello, I'm Will Leach, and this time Diane and I are back in the big studio around the big studio table because, as Mrs. Merton might have said, let's have a heated debate.
Well, let's have a discussion anyway. I know
Okay.
you get overexcited when we're in the big studio. In recent episodes, we've mentioned how the idea of reconciliation and community relations is changing with the years where we live.
So there's been some research done. There's a report just released called Rethinking Community Relations. It's compiled by Dr. Kathy Bollard. Kathy's with us. Hi, Kathy.
Hi.
Hi. And Kathy is a board member at Contemporary Christianity, one of the partners in the report, as is the very Reverend Dr. Norman Hamilton.
Oh, please, Diane, drop the very. I'm not very anything except very stupid at times.
Welcome back, Norman. We love you.
Glad to be here.
And for Norman's life story, here's a wee plug. Listen to the episode before this one.
Absolutely worth a listen. Now, we had hoped to welcome Joe McKeown of YouthLink because YouthLink also played a part in this report. And by the way, for Joe's life story, go back 2 episodes.
So you'll hear a little bit about him.
You will indeed. Anyway, Joe's not so well, so he can't be with us today, so get well soon, Joe. And Clonard Monastery Belfast helped make the report happen, as did the Community Relations Council, who also support this podcast. So thanks to all those groups, and welcome to everyone. There's a lot for us to look at here. What the report wanted to find out and why, how everybody went about it, what was actually found out, and then what we all do next. So let's start, Norman, with the what and why. What was Contemporary Christianity, of which you are chair, keen to enable this research to find out, to know about, to make happen?
I suppose the origins go back a couple of years. We had all become, I think, aware that the concept of reconciliation, indeed the thinking about reconciliation, had rather dropped off the radar, both politically and in wider society and indeed in church circles. And that, I think, deeply troubled us, that reconciliation had simply been reduced to yet another issue or policy for a political party to pick up, when actually it is much more fundamental to a healthy society. So we had a little gathering, supposed to be 18 months ago, of about half a dozen or 8 critical friends, and they said to us, you need to do some more work on this. And so that's the backdrop to it. And since then, we've worked with, as you mentioned, Clonard and YouthLink, and of course Kathy as our lead researcher. Community Relations Council are really very keen to help us in this, because reconciliation by definition is much more than simply community relations or getting along well together.
Well, I know we were really keen, or you were really keen, and YouthLink were really keen to get the voices of young people heard.
Yeah.
But Kathy, what was it that attracted you to be a part of this research and actually to help carry it out and shape it?
I've always been committed to the work of reconciliation. So for me, this goes back to my work in South Africa, where we worked a lot on sort of reconciliation, cultural integration between different race groups in South Africa. And for me, the role of the church was really critical in that. And I think I firmly believe in that. I also worked a lot with young people in South Africa on that. So to me, then, when I moved over here to Northern Ireland or to the north, that commitment has continued, and I've done quite a bit of teaching on reconciliation. And I really see the value of it for building, how do we build a flourishing society where everybody can live well and that everybody can be treated equally and justly. And I think that's really what kind of attracted me to it. I think the church has a role to play. I think it's maybe lost its way a little bit in that, as Norman has explained, with the society as a whole. Yeah, that work of reconciliation, the role of the church, but also doing it with young people, with Clonard and the Catholic community and in the interfaith community, I think was really critical as well.
What word would you put on it to describe it, Norman? You said it's kind of lost its way, it's kind of stalled. Is it disconnected? Is people no longer care? Or people care but they just don't know what to do?
That's a really interesting question, Will, and I think my take on that would be that the constant, and I don't want to be cynical and blame the political system, but I think the constant bickering, the constant jostling for position, indeed at times the constant bad language and bad mouthing of public discourse has made the whole concept of reconciliation just seem further and further away, so that whilst you might aspire to it, you see the possibility of it coming to fruition just receding steadily into the distance.
So you're really pointing the finger to some degree at Stormont.
I am, but I'm aware that politicians are an easy group to pinpoint. The churches have been much too much influenced by the need to keep their own people on board in an increasingly complex and difficult world, and that they have actually lost their own vision of what reconciliation looks like on a day-to-day basis.
So the research was needed. You all agreed on that. Diane, it's not often I turn a question around onto you in Inspired to Act, but I'm going to do it now because you did help facilitate a lot of this research. So, workshops, facilitators, how did it happen? What did you do?
Basically, there were 8 workshops in total. I personally was responsible for the 4 that weren't with young people, funnily enough, being an older person myself now. And I must say I found it fascinating.
Fascinating for what reason? I mean, what was the methodology? And deep down with reports, I don't care much about methodology. I want to know what you find. But who did you get? Did you put them in a room? Did you send them out questionnaires? How did you go about finding out what people thought?
Well, I think we tapped into the different people who would be involved with, for example, Contemporary Christianity or Clonard or YouthLink, and everybody was really invited who wanted to participate, and it was held over a series of both evening and morning and afternoon sessions, so that hopefully at a time there was a time that suited everybody. The first 2 workshops were people that really had been invited by Contemporary Christianity, and we really just wanted to use something a little bit more creative to enable people to talk in a slightly different way, I think, to try and open up the conversation about reconciliation. And it was reconciliation and belonging. I think those were the 2 words that we really focused on in terms of the research. We used photographs which were just a wild selection of a number of different photographs that people could just say what stood out to them about how it spoke to what they felt about reconciliation. We just got people to literally react to the word. What's the first thing that comes to mind, for example, Will?
Well, photographs
if you hear
of
the word?
what is what I'm intrigued by. What photographs of what?
Literally
a mural, a riot?
No,
a different race
it wasn't
group,
even necessarily anything to do with what you would perceive to be reconciliation. But for some reason, for example, I remember a spiral staircase was one of them. It was a beautiful bird was another. But for some reason, it spoke to certain people. Different photographs spoke to certain people. And there were rarely times when there was a fight over that's the photograph I want to speak to, because you don't want that in a reconciliation workshop.
I mean, I picked up a photograph in one of the sessions for myself of a couple of large wheelie bins full of rubbish. And I picked that up because it seemed to me that the whole discussion about reconciliation had become a mess.
Yeah, so I mean, literally, it was to try and get people to think just slightly outside the box. And I think also this idea of what is it the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word reconciliation? And actually, that's what really revealed some quite deep issues around different people's understanding of what reconciliation means to them.
Let's spell out a wee bit, because traditionally, to people living in Northern Ireland, you think, well, over a certain age group, I think we've agreed, that means dealing with the legacy of the Troubles. And legacy is a very popular word still in our courts, even though we haven't really ever worked out how to sort it out and deal with it. But it no longer clearly means just that to everybody that you spoke to. So with the kind of people that Joe works with, presumably you were getting different responses. Were you hearing back from groups? Were groups cross-fertilising?
You even got the equivalent of eye-rolling when we mentioned the word reconciliation with some people, because they were like, oh, reconciliation again. When do we ever move on from just the word?
And people are a bit tired, I think, of using the word reconciliation because it feels like it goes nowhere. And we also, I mean, that's one of the findings in the report, right, is also about, you know, what do we mean by reconciliation? And I think we've got a bit of a block because we're saying we need to understand and have a definition of reconciliation before we move on. But actually, I think the research is saying that's part of the work is having this conversation of what do we mean by it. Because before I come to what young people were thinking, not everybody thought that reconciliation is about the past or the legacy of the past. Some people, for reconciliation was about reconciliation with God and that angle of it. And that's also not exclusively what it is. It might be part of it from a faith angle. And Norman, you can maybe say more. So there were various, really varying responses. But I think what came quite clearly from young people was actually when they're talking about reconciliation, they're thinking much more around ethnicity and racism and the issues around immigration. And we have a much more culturally diverse society now. So reconciliation is also, yes, it's about the past, but it's also about new communities that are here, about issues on immigration, also around gender-based violence, and how do we not just think about the Catholic Protestant thing, but how do we think about belonging and inclusion for everybody? And I would say the young people really brought probably a much more nuanced perspective and perhaps a more up-to-date perspective on reconciliation, not excluding sectarianism and the past, but saying actually it is much more than this now.
And that's really healthy, Norman, isn't it?
Oh,
It makes us think twice and reappraise what any of us is doing or thinking about.
Yes, I mean, I think most of us come with a particular worldview, a particular set of parameters that we bring to almost any discussion. And having the perspective of the younger people with their concerns about racism and poverty and violence against women and girls, and indeed also their political frustration and feeling that the political parties are doing nothing for us generally, never mind on reconciliation. Getting that perspective, I think, has become really important to us as we try to interpret the findings. Because that is going to present a huge challenge to wider society as to how, on the one hand, we will hold together the need for reconciliation from the past, but also the need to be advocates for societal change, and that brings us directly into party politics.
Well, there's a lot of stuff we can come on to there. But in terms of the headline stuff, of what you all actually found. And I'm sitting here conscious that I'm the only person around the table who hasn't done any work on this. But anyway, the first headline immediately leaped out at me because when I looked at it, and I've written it in bold in the notes that Diane and I are reading here, it just says, for all that you've discovered, sectarianism is still there, Kathy. What we've always worried about, we can still be worrying about. It's still there.
Yeah.
In what forms? How does it manifest itself? The traditional ways or in new ways or disturbing new ways? Or how do we see it? How did you find it?
We didn't go too deeply into sort of how it manifests, but I think all the traditional sort of things like bonfires and sort of the Catholic Protestant divisions, all of that was sort of in the room. But racism and sectarianism aren't really that different, right? So it's still there, but this is probably like an extension of those same attitudes and beliefs to me continue through to people maybe of different colour, people from different nationalities.
Yes, I think it's easy for us to feel that sectarianism is something that belongs to the past. But I was very struck a few months ago in the court case in the High Court that has been brought between the two government ministers over signage in Grand Central Station. The judge was very explicit in saying to them, the two ministers or their legal representatives, we are seeing sectarianism in full flight here. Go away and sort it out between yourselves. Now, for the judicial system to say that there is deep-seated sectarianism at the heart of government is profoundly distressing, even if he did overstate it. But what we are picking up and what Kathy and the others picked up is that the young people are still seeing this bubbling away in all sorts of weird ways.
I think for me, because I was involved in, along with Jamie Plant, who was the other facilitator for the youth side of things, in trying to shape ways of people having conversations. But we wanted to widen it beyond that because society has changed so much. And, there are many things that are coming out. But in terms of what Kathy said about the reason why she wanted to get involved with this research and this idea of wanting a society that was thriving and flourishing, one of the things that did come out, and one of the things that we wanted to tap into, was this sense of the reconciliation of all things, that actually we are separating out, the sort of relational stuff or the sectarianism or the reconciliation stuff from the rest of life, which is all involved in some of the problems that we have. So poverty issues are really, really important in that. How people thrive and flourish in their lives. And so the word belonging was also used as part of this. And enabling people to take it back to their sense of when they felt they were belonging and when they felt unwelcome, enabled people, I think, to think slightly differently, even in those adult groups who maybe, I think, were a wee bit stuck in this sense of, oh, we've been involved in peace and reconciliation for a long time. We're here because we're interested, but actually not really having moved on with the rest of society. I don't know if you agree with that, Kathy, in terms, you were all at those. In fact,
Yeah.
Norman and you were at the same workshops as I was.
I agree. And in terms of belonging, I think there's almost, for me, that came out is we can have a sense or sort of a belief that, yeah, you're all welcome and everybody sort of belongs and we don't have an issue. But actually, when you dig deeper, belonging came up as a really, really big theme in terms of belonging can't just be about hello and being nicey. We actually have to think through, how do we change our frameworks? How do we change our models? How do we change our monitoring and evaluation, our everything to be far more inclusive? So the religious education curriculum came up. If we're talking about belonging, how are we showing belonging of people of different faiths in our curriculum? How are we showing belonging in terms of how we even think about safeguarding, about who's included, whose voices are there? So that, to me, it was a much deeper, it needed to go deeper, that sort of sense of belonging. But linked to that, and it was the idea of belonging. Yes, it is relational and it is about interrelationships. But the big thing also was around structures. And I think this is where what came out quite strongly for me, that when we're thinking about reconciliation, yes, it is about our relationship, but our relationship can only go so far as the structures that reproduce inequality, the structures that produce poverty. As long as they're there, we're never going to be able to go the full way forward with reconciliation, with belonging, with inclusion, because our society is structured to promote that exclusion, if I can say that. Education systems, for example, that reproduce inequalities. You have your grammar schools, your secondary schools, that is reproducing difference.
And it's stopping people from getting to know people who are different to them and understanding them on a human level. So they become a non-identifiable group, which is generalised rather than individual personal relationships with someone who you get to know who is different than you. One of the things that we find as we go around finding out what need is in local communities is that isolation and loneliness is top of the list in many places. But when we think about, well, what are the root causes of isolation and loneliness? Actually, a lack of a sense of belonging is a huge part of that. Yeah. And so if we cannot enable people to feel that sense of belonging to something positive, and let's face it, some of our churches are pretty much one socioeconomic group. And, that's a challenge for us as a church.
I mean, historically, I think it's fair to say that most churches operated on the basis that you believed before you belonged. That has completely turned around in the last 10, 15 years, so that people need to know they belong and have that expressed to them and feel it and know it for themselves as part of their journey to believing. Now, that is a colossal challenge to the churches. Folks from an urban or working class environment, and I spent 25 years in one of those. How do they integrate with people who are actually really well off? Because each group simply doesn't get it, what the opportunities and privileges and difficulties and struggles are of the other group. So whilst our research is, we hope to help assess conversation in wider society, some of the underlying issues here are mega for the well-being and future of individual churches as well as the churches and institution.
But what struck me out of all your findings was coming back to faith communities, to churches. They are trusted, but only when their actions match their values. In other words, where the money's put where the mouth is. And if it's not, big problem. What did you find there, Kathy?
I think the church is perhaps on a bit of a crossroads because, yes, it is trusted by some, but it's also not trusted by a lot. And I think a lot of the conversation that we had was people are tired and there is eyeball rolling when it comes to the work of reconciliation or thinking about the word. But actually, when you dig deeper, there are pockets of people who are really committed and really motivated by it. But I think there was actually consensus that we can't look to the institutional hierarchies for that change to happen. And I mean the church institutions for that change to happen. If change is going to happen, if we're going to be motivated by this and we're going to take this work forward, it's going to be much more at a grassroots level, at a community level. And so I'm not quite sure that there is a lot of trust, to be honest, in the institutional church. The trust is in the individuals that are committed and the people that they know who are taking that forward.
I think, though, one of the things that I was quite interested in terms of what was coming out through the research was that, and you talked about some of the systems that actually don't really help around helping with reconciliation. And some of those are fundamental in terms of, for example, the Office of the First and the Deputy First Minister provide the funding for all of the community relations work, whilst the Department for Communities, a totally separate department, funds community development and community cohesion and all of the stuff that enables communities to move out of poverty. So surely there needs to be something more of an integrated model in terms of the way that we work, because you cannot do reconciliation, peace and reconciliation in a vacuum and separately, otherwise it is meaningless. Is that not right, Norman?
I mean, if I would say, I think that's blindingly obvious. For me, one of the horrible ironies is that the Executive Office are the ones who sponsor the famous TBUC, Together Building a United Community project, whilst at the same time the knives are out between the political parties. So on the one hand, we're trying to build a united community and putting money into that with young people and programmes, and at the same time we are modelling the exact opposite. Now, I'm not getting at the politicians again, because I don't want to see them just as the only culprits here, but it's a very good example of the convenient split that a policy can be put there, but actually the outworking of it at political level and at a relational level is disconnected from the very policy they're trying to promote.
So if the politicians were trying to actually model what it is they're encouraging the wider community to do,
building together a united community,
but
that
sadly,
would help.
We have higher expectations of our churches and our faith community, and the statement here is faith is credible when it is lived, which obviously we are saying, people who were in the research were saying, actually, yes, if it is lived, yes, the faith can have an impact, but not everybody is saying that it is being lived.
That it's real.
Yes, exactly. So there's a difference between people speaking about it and actually people who are engaging in it.
I think reconciliation has also become programmized. And so we think we're doing reconciliation when we're doing a TBUC program, when we're doing a Peace 4 funded program, and we're checking boxes. This is a community relations project, we're doing reconciliation. And actually what the research is showing is we need to move beyond that reconciliation is not just about, that program or an outcome, it is about a whole process. And we look at also how we do our monitoring and evaluation as a society. We need to know how many Catholic, how many Protestant, or how many PUL, CNR people and other.
Protestant Unionist Loyalist.
Yeah, Protestant
Catholic.
Unionist Loyalist and Catholic Nationalist Republican. And then the other category is other. So first of all, those binaries just don't work. But by counting people in that way, we're reinforcing actually a divided society, and we're excluding the people we're trying to integrate and who are part of the society because they're just under another. And so their voice is lost, their power is lost. So that's what I mean also by thinking about our frameworks of inclusion, who's included. That's why I think, it can't be a siloed project. It has to be understood as a process, not a project or a program.
I think it's time to cheer everybody listening up.
Yes,
because,
let's do that.
There's a lot of things we've listed that aren't right, that could be better, that are a bit, can get us disillusioned. But what the report does do is it talks about renewal. And it says we have 5, I like the term, 5 shifts. In other words, 5 things that need to change, as I would read it. And I'd like to get the sense of what we all think could make a difference, could help. Because if we have a way of doing things that's no longer working, then we need to think about where we go next.
I think there's a major piece of work to be done, by our theological and our Bible leaders and our Bible teachers to explore the whole counsel of God from Genesis to Revelation and not just focus on a particular few verses or phrases or emphasis. There's a real theological divide on this, that reconciliation, for example, reconciliation between us in a horizontal way really will only come when we're all reconciled vertically with God.
I completely agree with you that there's a lot of resistance in the faith sector, particularly in the churches, around the idea of reconciliation. So I think that is quite a common understanding. And it's one of the recommendations that is made, is that we need stronger theological teaching on what is reconciliation, moving beyond just focusing on personal salvation.
It seems to me that one of the legacies of the Troubles, if I can use that phrase, is that we have almost as a society totally forgotten how to disagree agreeably. We're in an increasingly aggressive, polarised, opinionated
Need to win.
And at a personal level, in the last week, I was personally quite challenged by a journalist on something that I didn't say. And I actually found that really helpful, because you assume that the way you see things or the way you speak about things is the right way, and the totality of the right way. And to actually, within the Christian community, to learn to be challenged and rebuked and see that as a blessing would be an enormous step forward.
I'm going to bring out something that I noticed, and the title you gave it was From Parallel Agendas to Integrated Justice, because it was, we had the Troubles. We have a legacy as a result of those troubles. We need programmes to fix the problems that that legacy is. Oh, by the way, we're also having race riots, and we're having this, that and the other. And it seems like 2 separate stories, but it's all part of the same thing. We've got a society that's mixed up. We need to learn to work together and live together. And although that seems very obvious, I think it's revolutionary to the way most people here will instinctively think, especially when they hear this R word we've been talking about for 40 minutes.
Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi, just before he died, he published a wonderful volume under the title called Morality. His underlying thesis is that society needs to move from I and me to we and us. And that seems to me to put it really well, that instead of me wanting what I want, whatever the cost, then I need to think about what you want, even if that has a cost to me. Now, in a society that is increasingly individualistic, and I mean, even the iPhone is a good example of that, there is both a big challenge and a big opportunity for the churches and the faith communities generally to start promoting in public the importance of your well-being rather than ours.
A couple of things. One, you're talking back to theology. To me, where's that theology of we are all created in the image of God? Not white people or Protestants or Catholics are created in the image of God. Like, we are all, and that has implications then for how we treat each other. But just coming back to the siloed thing, I think this is where the faith community, I think, has a real opportunity to influence, because we have to be thinking a lot of how society is shaped is also about our funding structures, by the policies that are developed. We need to have some policy that focuses on marginalization. For example, we need to think about race and racism independently of other things, around gender inclusion independently. There's a place for it. But we also need to then think of how do we bring that back together? Because if our policies are siloed and our funding is siloed, we will reproduce siloed societies. And as you said, sectarianism, racism, all these different isms, sexism, all of these things to me have the same root. And so we need to challenge that root. We also need to challenge some of the power that sits behind it, some of the patriarchy that sits behind it, that also reproduces these kind of sort of hierarchies and divisions. And I think the church has that opportunity. It can't stay in a sort of its own silo. It needs to also be branching out into the policy field, into the funding field, and challenge some of that.
Absolutely. But isn't there an almost insoluble problem here? And I'm an optimist by nature, that if we need to do this and we need to do that, I would like you to write the names of the people who are going to take the lead on this in the back of an envelope. Because as a dear friend of mine, who's a very well-known member of the Catholic clergy, memorably on a Radio 4 broadcast that I was sharing with him, said, we have run out of church leaders. Now, that is not, as a former Presbyterian moderator, that is not an attack on any of my colleagues, but we have lost any overall understanding of what it means to be a Christian leader in wider society. There are some wonderful congregational leaders, absolutely. But what does it mean to be an advocate for the Lord in the public square, to do it with conviction and grace?
I actually think there is stuff happening, and that more and more there are places where light is being shone. But that's what the whole point of this Inspartiac podcast is. It's to try and encourage people to take that first step of what is it, God is calling you to do in your own small place. I mean, let's face it, there's the good news story of what we're trying to talk about here is maybe what's happening currently in Ballymena with a number of churches who have engaged together to understand better how to engage with their local communities. And not only that, but they're engaging with wider civic society and to try and address some of the issues that have been happening over the last while in Ballymena, specifically drug-related deaths in young people and the racist riots that happened last year. So there are churches stepping up there. There are people engaging together, and that's being facilitated by a group of people who are stepping into what they believe God is calling them to do. And they may be misunderstood, but actually God is present with them, and I've had the privilege of helping them to facilitate that process. And honestly, the transformation that's already happening within that group and the doors that are opening into people very different to them is amazing. So I do think it's possible. So I know you're normally an optimist, but I would say yes, there are many people out there. How do we shine light on those and enable those stories to be told, which is what Inspartiac is seeking to do.
Because if we're saying that there's nobody's name to put on the back of the envelope, why are we here?
Yeah.
Or we're saying, what about you?
But I think what your story tells, and also what came through the research as well, is people are saying they don't want to wait any longer for, the hierarchy, these leaders, supposed leaders, to do this and to get on with it. They are saying we have to get on with it. Grassroots people, community level people, we need to get on with that work, and we can do it, and we can influence by talking about it. And I think to me that's where a lot of that hope comes.
In a rare moment of having an opinion about something which I spent my whole career trying not to do,
You're allowed to
when
in
I
this.
was working, and I know I am, well done for thinking of doing this, well done for doing it, well done for all the work that you've put in to make it happen. My final thought to you is, who needs to see it? Doesn't need to go on a shelf. I know that really distresses researchers and people writing reports. Who needs to see this? And even just have a shake at their shoulder. Look at this, read it, think about it. Who?
I can't answer that question in very specific terms, but there's not an obvious answer to that question. Well, I suspect that we're heading into a multi-year process of small conversations. I mean, what I mean by small group conversations. It's a bit like how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. I think the biggest challenge that I haven't really got my head around is how do we get this heard in the political circles? Because it's the political circles that are fundamental to making the structural changes. And we're a year away from an election, and so all the political parties are in election mode already. There'll be another election for Westminster not long after that. So I personally am struggling a wee bit at how it's heard politically, but I'm quite sure we can get it heard in civic society, and hopefully that will generate its own momentum.
Kathy, my favourite stories have always been how others see us. I love it when someone who hasn't spent 50 years in this society looks at us. When you look at us, and you know this place pretty well now, where do you even start? You know, you've done all this work, thank you, great. Who needs to see it from your point of view?
I would love the theological colleges to be engaging with this and challenging theology. And how do we get that in there? I would love that to happen, because I think that really is important. The narratives, the beliefs that we hold really shape how a society is built. Our funders need to see it. So that could be the executive office, you know, people like CRC, Peace Funding, others. There's lots of funders. We need to, how do we shift that, you know, the whole ecosystem? To me, this whole thing has been about how do we find the pockets of people, because there's lots of pockets of people who are doing this. There's going to be politicians who are interested. How do we find those people? So to me, this is about building a movement, and that's going to take time.
So if you're in a pocket, dear listener, thank you for doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Tell us a story about it. Send a wee note about it. There's lots of opportunities to do that.
Norman, Kathy, thank you so much for taking the time to explain.
Yes,
Diane, thank you for helping explain. Thanks also to Colm Flanagan and Jake McGill for engineering this episode of Inspired to Act in big old Studio 1 at Commission Studios. I'll be honest, we're grateful to get a chance to even be in here, because they're recording a new drama series on the life of Noah in here at the moment. They had to re-rig everything for today, and obviously we've all had to squeeze in beside the ark. Anyway,
But we're in the big room, and that makes you happy.
That makes me very happy. Thanks to everyone who listened. You can tell us your thoughts or those little pocket stories, comments about this podcast. Send a text from your podcast app. It's at the bottom of the episode blurb. We would love to hear from you about it.
ThriveIreland.org is the place to find out about the work of Thrive Ireland, and you can find Thrive Ireland on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube.
And we'll be back with you very soon. But for now, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.